Let me identify by start Joe Arrigo from Colorado and New Mexico, who's here, whom Eugene Cole referred to, and I do that for a reason. Here is a restoration contractor who does restoration, water, disaster, mold, remediation, and reconstruction, who himself, 10 years ago? Gene, when was that?
About 8 years ago.
8 years ago, who came to Eugene Cole and said, I want to start using, in this case, ATP as a measure to determine how well his company is doing in cleaning effectiveness, improved hygiene, and then mold remediation. And that's really innovative, and that was done a long time ago. But why am I making that example? It takes the bridge between the laboratory work, and here's someone who was pioneering enough 7, 8 years ago, who was in the cleaning and restoration business and reconstruction, to come all the way back to the scientist and say, I want to start using these measures. Will you help me ruggedize how I apply those? Joe, would you just give people a wave? Thank you. The floor is open for questions.
Gene, I was wondering if you know, is there a difference in ATP levels between actively growing vegetative bacteria and the kinds of bacteria that Dr. Dancer talked about that are just sort of hanging on a surface in sort of metabolic stasis waiting to get picked up and go to the next person?
Well, it's kind of like with endotoxin. You can have bound ATP within an intact cell or free ATP where a cell has lysed, but the ATP is still there until it's physically removed. It's a little easier perhaps to remove and particularly from surfaces than endotoxin. Endotoxin, you basically have to cook, almost incinerate things to break down endotoxin. But we have that differentiation, just free and bound ATP. So it can be a factor whether you're measuring, let's say, culturable organisms, which could give you, false measurement, so to speak, because there could be a lot of non-viable or non-culturable cells that are the bulk of the bioburden on a surface. They've just been there. Something's amplified and died off, and we still have a heck of a lot of ATP that we need to remove and then show that it's been cleaned. So again, another good reason, if we're going to use culturable sampling for viable organisms, it's got to be in conjunction with other methods.
I am a restoration contractor working in Colorado and New Mexico, and happened to be taking a class at the Life Science Center, where we learned from the food industry about ATP, and what I found out was the wine industry, the food industry, and so on was using this way of testing whether or not their equipment was clean enough so that the next shift could continue and that they were sanitary. And I thought, well, that's exactly what we need, because we're trying to clean up, in our case, sometimes sewer damage and things that are not so pretty, and we couldn't determine other than with our eyes and nose how clean it was. So I looked into this, and Dr. Cole and his colleagues developed these tests. As I look back at them now, I'm a little bothered by the design of what those tests were, and I think today we would create better designs. What has developed for me in my company is parallel to what we do when we dry a building, and we've learned from using the S500 drying standards that everything changes depending on the environment and the climate, and it changes across the United States based on these things, based on rainfall and climate, that sort of thing. So when we go in to dry a building, we have to test the materials that we're trying to dry against what we call a dry standard. So what we do is try to find an unaffected area, measure that, and then we dry whatever that material is to that dry standard. Now, I took that And that's how I use ATP today. I take a similar material that I can clean to the level that I can clean it. I check that, and that becomes my threshold that measures whether or not my crews are cleaning things appropriately. So I can walk into a job, I can tell if there's an area we missed, I can tell if the solutions we're using are working or not working, and I can do this all in a matter of each test takes about 5 seconds. So I can tell immediately whether or not something needs to be recleaned before I bring in a specialist if I need high-level clearance, and I need to bring in a hygienist to determine is this clean enough to allow the people back into school. Then I know the answer before I bring him in, and that's the way we use it in our business. But the thing I like about it is some of these systems are specific to fungal or bacteria or whatever. Dr. Cole, you can expand on it, but my impression was that this was more of a total organic load, viable or non-viable, and it was as close as we could get. It's not perfect. You can't, nothing is perfect, but it gave us a total load of what was there. Now, the next thing that happens is my colleague says, but they can't tell you what species it is. Well, from that standpoint, I got to the point where I said, if it's there, I need to clean it. I don't care which bacteria it is or so on and so forth. I have to clean it to the best level I can, and I didn't have to spend a lot of money doing the testing and wait for the tests to come back for weeks. If one of my crews is out cleaning a sewer damage, I need to know then whether or not it's clean enough for people to go back in. I can't wait for 2 weeks for the test results.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. And you're right. We did not monitor before and after cleaning. And in fact, when Joe first came to me and we discussed it, the major issue is variability. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at new materials versus old materials, dry materials versus wet materials. And so then we went into environments and collected real-world measurements, again, up and down walls and along baseboards. And so we should have done the next phase, which would have been, let's do before cleaning and after cleaning, in 3 different environments or classrooms or whatever. But it can be a useful tool. And in fact, if you'll think back or look back to Stephanie Dancer's presentation this morning, she had a chart, what's being done in the food industry to verify cleaning effectiveness versus hospitals and how deficient hospitals are. She had on the left side with the food industry a comprehensive approach with at least 3 perspectives. One is visual assessment, another one was ATP, and then there was culturable. And again, we may wind up saying those are the 3 we need to use in schools, or maybe there's 4, or maybe we're not going to do culturable. Just don't know yet, but it will be more than one component, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you, Larry. Just one thing I thought of as we're talking through this. Economics has come up through the day, and of course, that ultimately affects what we do in business. It has to come down to the economics of it. When I found ATP applications, I found it, and what I got excited about was it was in the wine industry. And the wine industry had been sanitizing its barrels and its, not the barrels so much, but the lines where they bottled had to be sanitized every night, and they did it with hot boiling water. And they had to bring water up to that temperature and then distribute it through the lines long enough to sanitize them. Then they would use ATP at the other end to determine whether or not they were sanitized. What they found out was there were some other methods that they could use to sanitize their lines that used cold water. and they were able to do it in a shorter period of time without the energy use of boiling the water and still get the same results with their ATP. So economically, there are some applications for these things that I think that we can move the industry forward and save energy.
Lynn Craft. Just wanted to make a comment on all the presentations. Thanks to Dr. Dancer, I'm never going to look at anybody's nose in the same light. We talked a lot today about cleaning and the failure of cleaning to do what we wanted to do, and I think we've got to define that a little more closely. I remember reading a book by a man by the name of Bill Clark, wrote a little guideline to the industry many years ago. Maybe you know the thing, but he makes a comment in there about cleaning having a couple levels. One is dealing with the visible, the tangible, the identifiable, the thing that the contractor and his people are under obligation to go in, find, and take care of, get rid of it and remove it. And then he moved on to the lesser known items, the microorganisms and stuff that we've been talking about today. And we've talked consistently about the hospital environment and whatever, where there's a true need to address the microorganisms, because that's where we've got diminished health and we've got people with compromised immune systems and so on. I think as we progress with this, we're going to have to, for the good of the industry, we're going to have to make it clear that visual inspection or visual assessment is not a failure to accomplish what it intends to accomplish and what can be done by the cleaner with limited technology at hand. I was pleased to see somebody come up here and say, hey, look, we did tests and these microfibers grab this stuff and it's gone. Now, cleaning is the removal from the environment of what we don't want. Simple enough. And a microfiber that grabs something and holds it and removes it, that's not disinfection. That is cleaning. That's real cleaning. If you loosen it up with a blast of steam, so much the better. But that's a true application of cleaning to the second stage, where we're dealing with the unseen and the unseeable, which the contractor and in-house, nobody has a chance to, you can't judge that. We've already gone through all these various methods, and it's great that we can check for mold and fungus and all that kind of stuff, but the money in remediation that allows for that is never there in the contract cleaning industry, where you're in there and you get the job done and you get out, you're working on visual inspection. I just think we need to be a little cautious that we don't imply that the cleaning industry, of which we are an integral part, is a bunch of failures, because all these years we didn't know there were germs. We surely did. But there are circumstances where we must address the fact that there are harmful organisms, and we do need to have cleaning for health on the upside on that. There are other instances where cleaning for appearance, perfectly acceptable. We had a lot of chatted with different people today about whether we should clean floors, and the Dr. Dancer mentioned this morning. You know, the first guy that walks on them, and then the guy with the gentleman with the shoe. I never analyzed what was on the bottom of my shoes, but I live in an area where it's not uncommon for a farmer to walk in out of his pickup truck into a branch bank. Guess what he just did to my floor? And so when we're dealing with that, if we use that balance, and I'm going to continue to harp on this in the industry, because I hear green cleaning people acting as if we've been killing people all these years, but now we've got the light. And that's nonsense. And I don't want to see this being misread. I understand visual inspection will not tackle these serious health issues. And if the cleaner's going to do it in an appreciable amount of time, you give him a tool, and you guarantee by scientific testing that when he runs that tool, zoom, he's done the job. Because we're already going by that in the disinfectant industry. We put a quat in a toilet bowl. The guy says 10 minutes, wipe it off, it's clean. I never check it. But I'm sure he's right, because he's a chemical manufacturer and he wouldn't lie to me. Hey, that's the way we go with it. And we can't get into the kind of testing we need on the level of work that I'm doing. I got a few contractors in the room who will bear me out on this, that we're pretty limited as to what we can do. We look at it, carpet cleaning, same thing. You look at the carpet and the housewife says, hey, those spots the kids dumped all that stuff, it's gone, looks great. Okay, so just that one caution. I'd like to see cleaning clearly defined as what it's supposed to address and is it successful, and if it goes further, then let's address that issue, but not lump it all as a failure because we didn't get into things that we may not even need to get into. Thank
Okay, good. Let me just respond briefly. I really appreciate your comments. And just two things I'd like to mention. One, we are not looking to come up with measurement methods to show the professional cleaners are not doing their job or doing a bad job. What we would like to do is come up with measurement methods of cleaning effectiveness that can allow professional cleaners to enhance and make even better what they already do. That's number one. Number two is the cleaning for health issue. And I didn't mention that in here, yet it's critical. And we'll discuss this on Thursday morning, too, with the school standards study. But we will be tying in these various prospective, rapid, or near-rapid methods of cleaning effectiveness measurement with parameters of health, such as perhaps what Richard Shaughnessy mentioned, which would be performance on math tests or reading, standardized tests, school absences, that type of thing. Plus, cleaning is one component function of, again, an ecosystem. And we can have professional cleaners go in and do an outstanding job, use some of these measurement tools to verify they've done the very best that technically can be done. But the school is a disaster because they have mold growing in their ductwork. They have a leaky roof. So all of this has to be put in perspective. But very excellent points, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
One of the interesting aspects that hasn't been dealt with so far, and perhaps it'll be dealt with tomorrow, is that we're focusing on things as though they're new and fresh. But the reality that also happens out in the field is that often you're dealing with equipment that's aged and that in fact can be contributing to the problem. Is there any data being done to survey from the field the sort of standard of cleanliness of in-use equipment that's being used particularly in the schools area?
You're talking about cleaning equipment, standardization?
Sometimes the cleaning equipment can be used and reused and abused and dropped off a dock, and the squeegees aren't changed, the brushes are never cleaned, have been in the same 20-year-old scrubber for 20 years. I wonder if there's any data on the health implications of aged equipment.
No, nothing published that I'm aware of. I can give you one anecdotal example, though. This was an EPA study that when Dr. Mike Berry was manager of the EPA's indoor air research program, and we went to Denver, Colorado, and we worked with, at the time, Larry Cooper's cleaning and restoration company, and we went into office buildings, bank buildings. We went into a school in a kindergarten classroom, and this classroom was the last classroom on the end of a wing. The children would leave the carpeted classroom and go outside a door just a few feet away for recess. There wasn't grass, it was just dirt. So they would track in soil, heavy particulates, and along with it, bacteria, mold spores, so forth. These were kindergartners. Occasionally they would have an accident and wet the carpet. The teacher had been seeing a physician for the better part of a year. Actually, she was on her fourth allergist at the time with severe respiratory problems. I said, okay, let's get the janitor. And so we found him, and I said, do you vacuum the carpet in here? He said, yes, I do. And we vacuum it every day. Let's see the vacuum cleaner. Should have been in the vacuum cleaner museum. It was the most efficient bioaerosol generator that you can imagine. One of these old bag type.
Yeah.
You can see the dust
It's coming out.
And then I said, okay, do you clean the carpet? And Richard referred to this in his experience, and this fellow said to me, yes, I mop it once a week. So he's just stirring things up, it settles back down, there are mold and bacteria from the soil that's tracked in, you're adding moisture. When we collected our carpet samples, vacuum dust collection with the HVS3, it was very quantitative and everything, the mold levels were absolutely sky high, and it was 90+% penicillium. And we provided that information to the teacher to convey to her allergist and so forth. And obviously, we made recommendations for removal of that carpet and relocation of the students and that type of thing. But, you know, it's the hope that as we develop methods, tools to be used in combination, and perhaps there's different combinations for different applications of measuring cleaning effectiveness, that those then can be used to effectively evaluate the equipment. Because then, no matter what equipment is being used, it's going to have to meet this specific criterion. And that should give cause to professional cleaners to look at their equipment. It doesn't have to necessarily be the latest and greatest, but yeah, there's lots of vacuum cleaner data out there showing, you know, just turbulence from the brushes, the beater brushes and everything, what can be generated. Just particles from, you know, the carbon brushes in the motor into the tens of millions, you know, submicron carbon particles. What does that mean? What does that contribute? Well, it contributes the overall burden of particulates that then have to be removed. So the efficiency of your cleaning equipment, your extractors, everything. And you know, do we need to, when we clean, give consideration to what we stirred up? Does the professional cleaner in a school building now, when he or she is finished doing whatever the protocol calls for, we hope it's comprehensive, do they wheel in, you know, air movers and let them run for how long? And then we're back to the facility HVAC system and operation and maintenance of that, inspection on a routine basis. So yeah, we're focusing on cleaning and measurement effectiveness, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we're dealing with an entire environment. But yeah, great question about aged equipment, and is it potentially contaminating or not working as it's assumed to be working and being a pollutant generator? Yeah, it could be.
We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, folks.